అదే ఏం చెమట పెట్టుకున్నావు లైట్ ఎందుకు వేస్తావు నువ్వు Sorry for the short delay. Today we are going to discuss classes. We have 2 more classes, right? So today we are going to discuss our topics of unipolarity, bipolarity, and also we have multipolarity. So after the Second World War, after the establishment of United Nations organizations, there are many contemporary issues has been raised by the superpowers and also developed nations like United States of America and Soviet Union and also Britain, France and China. So at that time, during establishment of this United States Nations organization, all the states have decided to establish a new formula about collective security. For this collective security, it's a successful instrument for providing peace, international peace and security among the nations. So the basic requirement of collective security is that it's mandatory for the all the nations who are actively participated in the United Nations General Assembly. So here in our syllabus, we have the concept of unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity. So polarity means in international relations, it's a description of the distribution of a power. So a pole in international politics is popularly defined as a great or superpower. So after the Second World War, after the establishment of United Nations organization, so the world has been divided into two superpowers or two power blocks, which is namely United States of America, which is adopted capitalist ideology, and another one is United Soviet Socialist Republic, that is Russia, which is adopted socialist principles for their system. So the both superpowers until disintegration of USSR up to 1992, the world has been faced the Cold War situation between these two power blocks. So during this two power blocks faced this power politics and involved indirectly with their supporting nations. So at that time, am I audible or not?
Okay, done. So many contemporary issues are raised by these two superpowers, USA and USSR. The world has faced many problems about these realist situations raised by the two super blocks. So the world has in hands of these superpowers, including international organizations like United Nations organization and other organs of UNO, has been kept under the control of these two superpowers. So in this situation, the United Nations organization also not actively taking decisions individually. So without the support of these superpowers, United Nations organization cannot act its functions. So at that time, international stability also widely believed to be dependent on a specific structure of international system. So either multipolarity or bipolarity or unipolarity. So here the polarity debate is all about what kind of polarity is the most peaceful, stable, and durable. With both prospects and conclusions, all systematic theories of stability are at least partially reasonable and justifiable. To an extent, they have become a way of thinking their respective advocates. So, multipolarity, bipolarity, and unipolarity are thus better conceptualized as multipolarism, bipolarism, and unipolarism. So, in the comparison into the one other two, multipolarism seems to be more attractive. For many countries in the world, including China, the most desirable order will be a multipolarity that is stable and governable. So, in history, after the end of the Second World War, the great powers rise and fall. So they interact in an international system that is assumed to be primarily anarchic. So anarchy characterizes relations between great powers. Great powers means here USA and USSR. So although their interactions are often hierarchical, however, just an hierarchy, just as hierarchy is no guarantee of order or stability in either domestic or international politics. So interactions among these two great powers constitute specific types of structure in the international system that have been categorized in terms of their polarity by realist theorists. So a polarity means that a great power or a group of powers are at the center of the international system. So, according to Kenneth Walls, famous international theorist, in order to qualify as polar powers, states must score well on all the components of power. So, as we discussed, the international relations is all about the power politics. So, according to Kenneth Walls, also, he says about the world, the superpowers and superblocks, and also all the nations in the world are fighting for the supreme power or the great power in the world. So, here the size of population and the territory, endowment with resources, economic capability, military strength, political stability, and competence, a casual relationship among between polarity and international stability has been emphasized and theorized by many realists. So, to begin with this chapter, we'll present a theoretical debate on a relationship between power structure and international stability. So, in order to we have to inquire about several involving and contending concepts of multipolarity in order to see how the argument of multipolar stability has changed into multipolarism. So the polarity debate, it's all about power structure and international stability. So in international system comes to a conclusion that multipolar systems are more stable than bipolar ones. So this view has been further explored by Carl Dweck and David Singer, who provide a more comprehensive analysis of diffusion stability relationship and argue that the frequency and intensity of a war should decrease with an increase in the number of states. So I rise in the theory of unipolar stability, the hegemonic stability must be added to this debate. Its central idea is that the international system is more likely to remain stable with a single dominant state, develops and enforces the rules of interaction among members of the system. So here, many of the international theories like Charles Kindleberger and Robert Gilpin, Robert Keohane, Stephen Kanser extended their arguments about this international stability system and international politics. So, according to Holforth, a war among great powers is unlikely in a unipolar world because the unique people prevent any conflict from erupting among major powers. So, here the following a power and structural approach and consistent with our analysis of multipolarity and bipolarity. So, if we discuss about this unipolarity from the perspective of distribution of power among nation states, unipolarity signifies that only the superpower with an almost unparalleled amount of military, political, and economic power exists in the international system. So, according to Holforth, the international system in the post-Cold War period means after the disintegration of USSR, unanimously the state system became unipolar because there is no two superpowers. So after disintegration of USSR, the United States became single superpower in the world. So referring to the United States as the sole pole of the post-war system. So, Holforth argues that unipolarity in both peaceful and durable. It is peaceful mainly two reasons. Firstly, the power advantage of the leading state removes the problem of hegemonic rivalry from international politics. Here, a clear preponderance of power deters any political challenges. So, and another one is the power advantage of leading state reduces the salience and stakes of the balance of power politics among the major states. So after the disintegration of USSR, the USA, United States of America, became a unipolar world. So that's what we call it as unipolar world. So the hegemon can serve as a third party arbiter and offshore balancer. So by providing collective goods, maintaining the key security institutions, and easing of the local security conflicts, and the hegemon as the system's leaders and the other major states to jump on the bandwagon rather than balance. So, in a unipolar world, the security competition among other great powers had thus been minimized. So, here unipolarity makes both hegemonic rivalry and security competition among great powers unlikely. So, here unipolarity is also durable for two reasons. Firstly, power and geographical advantages are two unique pillars of the United States, which make its unipolarity lasting. In any of the underlying elements of power, no state is likely to be in a position to take on the United States for many decades to come. Moreover, as an offshore power separated by two oceans from all other major states, the United States can retain its advantages without risking any creation of a counterbalance and can thus preserve its likely longevity of unipolarity. Secondly, no potential candidate for a polar status like Japan, China, Germany, and Russia can pose any real threat to unipolarity, since any such effort would inevitably spark a local counterbalance well before it could create any global counterweight to American power. So, for bipolar system, from the perspective of the distribution of power among nation states, bipolarity signifies that exactly two power centers with nearly equal amounts of military, political, and economic power exist in the international system. So, as we discussed after the end of the Second World War, the world has divided into two super blocks. So here the theory of bipolar stability contends that a bipolar distribution of power can guarantee international stability. According to Kenneth Walls, stability should be measured by the peacefulness of adjustment within the international system and by the durability of the system itself. So based on these two criteria, Kenneth Walls argues in favor of the theory of bipolar stability. Regarding the peacefulness of adjustment within the international system, Kenneth Walls believes that four factors will reduce international violence in bipolarity. An absence of peripheries in the first factor in a bipolar world with only two world powers. There are no peripheries. So that is the United States, and the another one is Soviet Union as two poles in the Cold War period. So from the 1970s to up to the disintegration of USSR, we saw a Cold War in between all the member states in the United Nations organization. So the range and the intensity of competition in the is the second factor. So bipolar competition is not only intensive but also extensive. Neither side can tolerate any territorial loss or falling behind the economic growth, military buildup, and the spare race, and so on. So here in bipolarity system, we clearly observe that the USA and the USSR is fighting against each other in indirect method. So they are fighting with their ideological basis. So it is not argue the persistence of pressure and crisis in the third factor. So it is not argued that crisis decrease any danger and promote stability. So the preponderant power of the two poles is the fourth factor. So the both United States and the Soviet Union were so powerful that a slight shift in a power did not change the general balance. So in 1949, the United States lost China in 1949, and the Soviet Union lost China in 1962 with their relations. However, neither lost drastically altered to the American-Soviet equilibrium. So, in terms of durability of the system, Kenneth Walls argues that the Cold War bipolarity is very durable since any of the two poles overshadows the others. So, bipolarity will continue as long as there is a great gap between the power of the two leading countries and the power of the next most considerable states. So there are several criticisms also there against the theory of bipolar stability. Firstly, some authors believes that the relative equality between the two superpowers makes miscalculation easier. So that is especially true when the relative balance between the two powers is in flux. So this could result in revisionist war or preventive and preemptive war. And the second critique is a theoretical difficulty clearly exists in the theory of bipolar stability. One hand, this theory argues that any slight shift in power, such as China's France's moves towards independence away from the two competing blocks. So, on the other hand, however, this theory also asserts that each side is very sensitive to any move of the other side, and is inclined to see all international changes as of vital significance that affects the balance between the two. So, the thirdly, a peace by crisis is hardly a desirable prescription of international stability. So here the bipolar competition encourages a zero-sum mentality that drives each side to keep expanding its sphere of influence, thus makes crises happen more frequently. Commenting on Kenneth Walls' argument of the recurrence of crisis, many thinkers like Rosencrantz observes that it seems equivalent to saying that the world's most peaceful place is on the brink of war. If we discuss about the multipolar system or multipolarism, uh, from the perspective of this distribution of power among nation states, multipolarity signifies that more than two power centers with nearly equal amounts of military, political, economic power exist in the international system. So, the theory of multipolar stability argues that an increase in the number of independent actors in conducive uh, international stability, called Dewey's and Singer, defined stability from a systematic point of view as the probability that the system retains all of its essential characteristics. So, that no single nations become dominant, that most of its members continue to survive, and that large scale war does not occur. Carl Dweck and Singer also provide several arguments in support of their theory of multipolar stability. Firstly, multipolarity offers more opportunities for interactions that have a stabilizing effect on the international system by fostering social stability via cross-cutting cleavages and increase in the range of possible interactions between nations. So the most obvious effect of an increase in the number of independent actors is an increase in the number of possible pairs of dads in the total system. So in a multipolar world, international politics is not just a zero-sum game. No state needs to respond to another state's action in a tit for tat way. So, secondly, multipolarity diversifies the attention that a state pays to the other states. And also, it is claimed that as the number of independent actors in the system increases, the share of its attention and also that any nation can devote to any other must of necessity decrease. So, multipolarity thus likely to have stability effect on the international system. And thirdly, multipolarity dimensions is the necessity and possibility of an arms race. So if there are only two powers in the international system, then an arms race become inevitable because one state attempts too much match the latter's growth of arms while the former attempts to keep its proportionate lead. So in a multipolar world, however, Carl Dweck and Singer hypothesize that each country would only respond to an increase in arms in the amount that is likely to be deployed. An increase in the number of powers not only slows down the arms race, but it also allows for states to shift their alliances in order to maintain the balance of power. The flexibility of multiple bloc coalitions increases the prospect that balancing will occur and aggressor will be deterred. Uncertainty works to discourage aggressions. So, while Carl Dweck and Singer argue for the stabilizing consequences of a multipolar system, they admit its instability in the long run. The critics of Dweck and Singer raised at least two deficiencies that are unique to multipolarity. So, firstly, while multipolarity may be possible to avoid any large scale wars between big powers or superpowers, it will probably increase the number of international conflicts at lower level. And if a bipolar system involves a serious conflict between the two power blocks, at least reduces and eliminates conflict elsewhere in the system. And secondly, while multipolarity may downplay the significance of any single action by a state, including even a military buildup, in complicates the cost benefit calculations that in turn may spark unnecessary conflicts. So, on the one hand, greater consequences as a result of power shifts makes states more fearful and sensitive. On the other hand, a greater uncertainty about power and allies also increases the likelihood of miscalculation. So, when crises occur in a multipolar world, the dangers are diffused responsibilities unclear, and the definition of vital interests easily obscured. Kenneth Walsh thus attributes greater instability to a multipolar world. So, according to these thinkers, these concepts are different from each other. So, if we discuss about the advantages and disadvantages of this polarity system, if we discuss about the advantages of bipolarity, in bipolarity, weaker states tend to participate in institutional arrangements and dominated by one or the other of the major players. So the non-alignment movement during the Cold War played a distinctive role. It was successful in institutionalizing a path independent of either superpower. As we discussed, non-alignment movement is the important concept proposed by our former Prime Minister, our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, to the entire the world. So non-alignment movement is about the neutrality. So it is a forum. Almost two-thirds nations in the United Nations organizations is adopted this principle. So after the establishment of United Nations organizations, so non-alignment movement is the largest grouping of states around the world. So it is established in the movement has raised in the 1961. So it's an international organization dedicated to representing the interests and aspirations of developing countries. So many of the developing nations are adopted this non-alignment movement. So non-alignment movement was formed during the Cold War. Cold War, as we discussed, there is no direct war between these two power blocks. In this bipolar system, the two power blocks are intended to influence the war in the war conditions in the state system. So the non-alignment movement is established for a to create an independent path in world politics that would not result in member states becoming pawns in the struggles between the major powers. It identifies the right of independent judgment, the struggle against imperialism and neo-colonialism, and the use of moderation in relations with all big powers as the three basic elements that have influenced its approach. At present, an addition goal is facilitating a restructuring of the international economic order. And also, the bipolarity is less war prone than multipolarity because each superpower knows that only the other can threaten it, realizes that it cannot pass the blame and third parties. And also, they recognizes it can balance additions to the others' capabilities by internal rather than external means. And also, there are several disadvantages from this bipolarity. The world is sharply divided into two alliances, namely Western and Eastern alliances headed by the United States and the Soviet Union. For example, NATO established in 1949 with 15 member states, and a defense treaty with Japan 1941, UNJUS treaty in 1951. UNJUS means America, Australia, New Zealand, and it's a trilateral treaty. And CETO establishment, the Southeast Organization, it's established in 1956, and defense treaty with China established in 1954. So the smaller states are forced to join in any one alliance. So they got the promise to protection of weapons and the economic aid against their local rivals. So they are remained tied to its protective superpowers to limit influence of other superpower and its allies. And also, we have to discuss about this unipolar system about United States role in international system after the collapse of Soviet Union in 1990 led to the relative absence of balance of power competition. So the USA became a single superpower in the world after the disintegration of Soviet Union. So unipolarity in international politics is a distribution of power in which there is one state with most of the cultural, economic, and military influence, that is uh, um, the United States, which has become the most powerful country economically, scientifically, technologically, and militarily, built an alliance to determine the rules of the game and the defend status quo. So there are many advantages of the multipolarism. So multipolarity entails that the margin of states to act unilaterally is decreased, and a new player in global economies and politics have shaped a multipolar world. And also, every state having its particular qualities will have decisive say in the limited arena of affairs affecting to its region. And also, increasing role of United Nations in issues of population growth and human rights. So the no polar world will be based on cooperation between democratic by default countries, but gradually the process of formation also includes non-state actors. So there are several disadvantages also there regarding this multipolar world. A return to multipolarity simply means more instability among great powers. So the current distribution of power allows not only great powers but also middle, small powers and non-state actors to have military capabilities that could threaten the global security. And the presence of nuclear weapons is a source of instability. In particular, regional powers and states that are not great powers armed with nuclear capabilities could represent a cause of concern for global security. And terrorists armed with nuclear weapons, biological weapons could break havoc and target the heart of the most powerful countries of the world. Just a second. So, in this multipolar system, for the first time in history, the stability of the future world will therefore depend not only on the unpredictable effects of the rivalry among great powers and also middle powers, small powers, and non state actors with nuclear capabilities could become a serious threat for the global security. They could trigger and reinforce the rivalry among great powers and eventually undermine the peace and stability of the future world. So, the most important question is that a multipolar global order has to confront, therefore, is how to achieve cooperation among diverse actors. So, multipolarity in the world system does not mean that a multipolar world has already emerged and United States unipolarity has diminished. So, US is still the world's leading power. However, the problem is that it would not be able to maintain this position for long as its influence is declining. But the entire world order is undergoing a fundamental revision as multipolar aligned great powers cooperate in restructuring the global economic, financial, and political systems, creating major friction with the unipolar, the United States. So, uh, this is the concept of unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity. So, so we are also having the concept of this superpowers. So superpowers means it was the term first coined by William T. Fox. He defined a superpower as a great power whose armed forces is mobile, that it can deployed in any strategic theater, as opposed to a great power whose interests and influences uh, are confined to single regional threat. So a major power is different from a superpower. So as we discussed, after the end of the Second World War, the superpower, both United States and Soviet Union, become superpowers in the world. So the world has been divided into two power blocks, and also the superpower is typically, we know about these two power blocks after the disintegration of the United Soviet Russia. The USA is the remain as single superpower in the world. So here we have to know the meaning of this superpower is a state with a dominant position characterized by its extensive ability to exert influence or project power on a global scale. So this is done through the combined means of economic, military, technological, and political cultural strength, as well as the diplomatic and soft power influence. So a major power is different from superpower. A country could be described as major power when it has all the elements of power along with nuclear power, has the capacity to maintain balance of power within the given region. So superpowers are nations which can project military, economic, political power across an entire world all the time. According to Bhujan, compared to major powers, superpowers must fulfill much more demanding criteria, not only about power projection, but also relating to their legitimate status as global leaders as granted by others. So the end of the Second World War significantly altered power positions of various states on the global scenario. One of the significant developments was the emergence of the US and USSR as superpowers. In international relations, are essentially Eurocentric till the end of the both world wars. So, and the first time a non-European state, the United States, become a decisive factor in international relations. So, the weakening of the European states created a power vacuum that speedily filled by the US and USSR. Though these two states suffered heavy losses during the war, they were able to retain a position of superiority in terms of economic, military, and industrial capacity vis-a-vis the Western Europe. Apart from the attributes of power, the possession of nuclear weapons and expanded military forces at sea, land, and air has entitled the US and USSR to their superpower status post-World Wars. So, emergence of United States has a superpower. Post-Second World War, there was just one country which possessed a potential that no one state had. In July 1945, the Americans exploded experimentally the first nuclear device in history of mankind. They dropped two atom bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki that broke the opposition of Japan and laid for absolute surrender. The world has shocked as both US allies and Soviet Union were kept in the dark of the nuclear bomb. Japan surrendered unconditionally, and the consequent American victory deprived the USSR of all but a token share in the post-war settlement in the Far East. So the Soviet Union was an inferior and weak power for next 5 years till USSR developed her own nuclear device in 1949. So, beside its nuclear weapons, America became a superpower was the fact that no battle ever took place on her territory throughout a period of war. After the Pearl Harbor, Americans were engaged in an unmatched war, but the civilian lives and property were left untouched. So the uh, the Marshall Plan of 1947 helped in European recovery and obliged many states to enter the American sphere of influence, and the military strategy that adopted resulted the conclusion of several military pacts and alliances with these countries to further consolidate its relations. In NATO, that is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, provided for a strong platform for a strong military alliance with the European countries. If we discuss about the emergence of Soviet Union as a superpower, the power base of the Soviet Union was not comparable to that of the United States, but has become a leading industrial and military power in the span of few decades. The USSR had succeeded in establishing communist regimes in Poland and several other East European countries, which were liberated from its army from the Nazi control. The USSR had suffered enormous losses during the war and lost its troops, who were killed and wounded in large numbers in the Second World War. Its population was reduced by about 20 million people. Soviet Union steel production had been cut by half. Similar was the situation in agriculture and industry. So the Soviet Union became a nuclear power in 1949, but until 1953, the United States maintained clear superiority in areas like delivery system. The Communist Revolution in China in 1949 and signing of a 30-year treaty between two communist regimes has led to a strong contending status to the Soviet Union. Immediately after the Second World War, Soviet Union invested heavily in science and technology. Once Soviet Union developed its nuclear power, it became a rival of the United States, and the two came to be recognized as the superpowers. Both laid a power block each. After the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union faced each other directly in different parts of the world. According to Lunster, they were the two main actors in the international area. The geographic distance separating them was gone, but the political distance would soon to be greater than it had ever been. So the Soviet Union was able to dominate and make allies in the Eastern and Central and Southern Europe. So the impact of the superpowers has contributed for the mass production of possession of powerful nuclear weapons. So both the superpowers kept up the competition of the for the possession of more and more nuclear weapons. So the superpowers and their respective allies were in a constant fear of war, and the prospect of an anticipated war has led to strong alliance system and pulling nuclear weapons. War has come an important commodity, has the superpowers with the military ability and nuclear capability had the ability to start a war or its outbreak in the any part of the world. The superpowers had the capacity to instigate, escalate the tension and friction not only among themselves but also their allies and dependents. So the superpowers enjoyed certain super privileges and obligations in the sphere of international relations. So the reason that the superpowers enjoyed special status in their capability to regulate international system in such a way as to avoid the possibility of recurrence of a war. Thus, the superpowers possessed military capabilities and economic resources far superior to other countries in the rest of the world. With nuclear and other destructive weapons in their possession, they were able to influence events in many parts of the world and policies of many other countries. So, this is the meaning of the superpowers in the world. We have the next topic is about Cold War. After the establishment of two super blocks, the Cold War mainly originated from the German issue and remained confined mostly the Europe for a long time. So the Cold War meaning is, according to Bernard Baruch, an American industrialist and statesman, coined the term Cold War, which refers to the intense hostility and tension that developed in the relationship between United States of America and the Soviet Union. It became a bipolar conflict in which both the sides attempted without direct negotiations to apply pressure on each other for domination. The main feature of the Cold War was a complete breakdown of relationship or relations between the former wartime allies. So there was no attempt to achieve a political dialogue or to reach settlement in the conflict. Another feature of the Cold War was the growth of big arms race between the two power blocks with the discovery of atom bombs and the nuclear weapons. And the third feature of the Cold War was that the conflict between the superpowers did not confine to the region like Europe and Asia, but extended to almost all parts of the world. These two superpowers began to intervene in the conflicts of the other countries to gain whatever advantage they could. So, if we discuss about the origins of the Cold War, the origins of the Cold War may be traced back in the 1917 Russian Revolution, which gave birth to a new system. The system came to be known as socialist system, opposite to exploitative capitalist system by the United States of America. Here, the USSR made serious efforts to get the Western powers involved in checking the rapid rise of Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, the Second World War broke out in 1939. Germany attacked the USSR, violating the non-aggression pact between them. The USSR joined in the Allied powers and made great contribution to defeat the Axis powers. Despite its efforts to crush the Axis powers, the West always looked at the USSR with deep suspicion. So many situations are there in this Cold War. If we discuss about the stages of Cold War, there are several stages are divided by the our international theorists. So the growing mistrust and intensification of conflict from the period of 1946 to 1953, there was a growing mistrust and suspicion between the US and Soviet Union, even though better both cooperated in the formation of United Nations Organization in 1945. As the Soviet Union imposed communist regimes in the East European countries, the United States needed to contain the spread of communism. US adopted the containment policy through two doctrines that give the US feasibility to intervene both military and economically in other countries. So there are the Cold War, which means there is no direct war between the two superpowers. So they indirectly they influence their dependent states in conflict or disputes whenever it's happened. So the relaxation of the Cold War and the detent happened in early 1960s. A crisis situation developed in Cuba after the installation of the communists in power. So the United States wanted to topple the government with the prompt action taken by the USSR by sending missiles for the protection of Cuba, soften the aggressive mode of the USA. So this crisis brought the two powers on the brink of war, but the war, however, did not break out. The US relaxed its attitude towards Cuba. The USSR withdrew the missiles, thus the Cuban crisis ended in peaceful manner. So in 1970s, in after the 1975, but after that it's lost in momentum. The process of detent was as it peaks at the time of Helsinki conference in 1975. In late 1970s, a communist government was installed in power in Afghanistan. US supported anti-communist forces in collaboration with the religious fundamentalist forces Taliban to oppose the new government. The communist government, in order to stop the civil war, sought military and economic aid from the USSR, who promptly sent a large contingent of armed forces and other military economic aid in December 1979. if we discuss about the USA role in this Cold War period, USA wanted to stop this communist expansion, communist ideology expansion in the entire world system. So they supported some military organizations like Al Qaeda and some military, some terrorist organizations in Afghanistan and Iraq, Iran, and they supported some terrorist organizations in Pakistan during this Cold War period, which means where there is supporters of Soviet Union, they may encourage their opposite parties or their opposite nations with ideological basis. United States supported to fall their governments or to raise the conflict and disputes between their dependent nations. So, thus the Afghan conflict between the two superpowers has been termed as the rebirth or the beginning of the new Cold War. So, the Cold War further deepened when in Poland martial law was imposed in 1981 to quell the pro-democracy unrest. So, the relation between the USA and USSR reached already in breaking point in 1983 when the USSR shut down at South Korean civilian airliner, which was alleged to be a spy mission. And also, Soviet Union decline is often seen as the key reason why the Cold War ended by the 1985. When Mikhail Gorbachev became the president, the Soviet Union was embroiled in disastrous economic problems, and the Soviet satellite states in Eastern Europe were abandoning communism one after the other. Reformation from Eastern countries such as Hungary, Poland towards free market oriented policies. So the Soviet leadership led by Gorbachev came to realization that the entire system of communism is deficient and could not compete with the Western ideology of capitalism, making the West to win ideologically. So the communist blocs lost their prestige, the philosophy of communist and its tenets, making her supporters reluctant to support this dysfunctional ideology. So So the result of the Cold War had far-reaching implications in the international affairs. It resulted in man race for manufacture of more sophisticated armaments. Various alliances like NATO, CETO, Warsaw Pact, CENTO, UNJUS, etc. were formed only to divide into sharply into two blocks. So UNW, United Nations Organization, mainly became ineffective because both superpowers used to veto power for their national interests. And also, the pressing problems of poverty, health, education was regulated to background as expenditure is spent on piling armaments. The Cold War has distributed peace of the world as proxy wars escalated conflicts in various parts of the world. So, today, we have discussed about the unipolarity, bipolarity, multipolarity, and superpower concept, and also we have discussed about the Cold War. In next class, we will discuss about remaining chapters, namely power, national power, balance of power, collective security, peace and security, disarmament, and arms control. So for today, I am concluding the session. Thank you for your participation. Thank you all.